Welcome back to Beholder to No One, a D&D podcast. Today I'm here with my new business partner, Greg.
Hello guys, I'm back. It's been a while.
Yeah, Greg was in our magic one, the one we discussed about the different spells and things and weird explanations of common questions about magic. And today we're here to talk about annoying things that players do in D&D.
And I've had a lot of time to stew on this, especially with the whole pandemic thing happening, so I'll have quite a bit to say this time around.
Yeah, and I would like to emphasize that some of these things we do, so we're not.
I still disagree with that statement. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, okay. Phone use. Sorry. I had a frog in my throat there. So
Sure.
the first thing we will discuss, I think, is just arguing with the DM in general.
We've all done it. We've all been privy to that kind of situation, whether we be on the player side or the DM side, I would assume.
Yeah.
And I know we've said this many times in the past, specifically the last time I was on, is the DM is the law. Whatever happens in the game, just basically whatever happens is entirely up to them. They can adjust accordingly based on certain situations, but overall, the DM is the law.
Now, that doesn't mean the DM is always right.
No.
But there's a time and place. I know that I personally have argued with the DM when I didn't agree necessarily with their decisions, but I was like, okay, fine, it's your decision if that's what you want to do. I won't agree with it. It's fucking stupid, but that's fine. And usually, I think the way Greg and I usually handle it in our Thursday games and Wednesday when we're playing them is we'll say, okay, that's the rule, and then we'll look it up so that we can know for the future how to actually do it.
Yep. That happens at least 3 to 4, maybe even 5 times a week on our Thursday game, where I just kind of like pull out my phone and start looking up rules, because this is something we'll talk about later, but I am a rules lawyer, so.
A little bit. I think the last time I argued with the DM was actually in a play-by-post game, and my character knows a ton of languages, so I said I will translate. My character is not charismatic, so I said I'm a translator. I am not the one making the deception roll. No. He said I had to make the deception roll with my -1 deception. I'm like, I'm just translating. And he goes, yeah, but you're the one that's talking. And I'm like, if there's two people in a war talking and there's a translator, they don't get mad at the translator for translating.
I mean,
I lost. I didn't agree, but I was like, fine, whatever. You're the DM. I'll roll. I'll fail, but I'll roll. But yeah, I think it ends up making things messy. Like, it's fine if you're like explaining yourself and maybe they just forgot something, but it's different if like, no, this is how I'm playing it, and then you keep going.
yeah, I mean, I don't really remember any particular specific instances where I was the player and arguing with the DM about something. Nothing like crazy anyway. But I do remember one particular instance a while back when we were playing my Curse of Strahd campaign where I was DMing.
Yep.
And I can't remember the exact scenario. It was during combat, and one of the players had cast spiritual weapon, I believe. Or no, it was one of the enemies had cast spiritual weapon and attacked a character. One of the characters, I believe, was oh god, what was it? It's a fighter subclass. Basically, it allowed him to make an attack when an adjacent ally is damaged by something.
Protector.
Something like that. It might have been Protector, maybe. I can't. I'm blanking entirely on the actual name of the class, but basically, I said that I attacked the adjacent character with the weapon, the spiritual weapon, and he was like, "Okay, well, if you do that, I get my attack because you're attacking a adjacent player." And my logic to this was no, because the character himself is not making the attack; it's the spiritual weapon.
See that?
but basically it was like a back and forth for like 5 or 6 minutes about whether or not he would get the attack based on that fact itself. But we ended up saying that no, he doesn't get the attack, because in my brain the way it worked was the spiritual weapon was making the attack, but it just used the stats of the character that had cast it. So I treated it as more like a familiar than like an extension of that character.
I think that's more like, I don't think, if I remember correctly, the protection type fighter gets that if it's magic based. I think it's if it's a melee attack, and so that's a melee magic attack. I mean, I kind of get the logic, but it's not like the player's holding the weapon.
Right, which is kind of what I was getting at, but then I looked it up afterwards, and like after the game was over, I looked up the rules and I messaged them. I was like, "Hey, just so you know, I was mistaken. You should have gotten your attack," but it was just like at the time I wasn't going to sit there and look up the ruling for 10 minutes while everybody sat around and waited, you know?
Right. And it's good to, if you are the DM, to admit when you make mistakes and then going forward. That way you don't have that animosity. You're not always right, but at the time it's like, no, I don't think that's how this works. Just to move forward, let's get this game. We only have like 2 hours to
Right.
play. Let's go.
And I mean, with the way our groups usually work, even with 2 hours, we barely get shit done anyway, so.
We don't freaking start for 40 minutes because we're just talking.
That is true. That does happen quite a bit.
It's like, oh, we haven't talked for a week. Let's talk for 40 minutes.
We're on a time limit, but let's do it.
The other big thing for me, my biggest thing that I do wrong, I know, is phone use. Phone use at the table is a huge thing. Now, problematic because a lot of people nowadays, including our group, uses D&D Beyond, and you can use that on your phone. So we have our character sheets in front of us on our phones. But it's so easy for us to just get distracted and pull up things. Oh, look at this, look at that, look at this, look at that. And that causes crosstalk, which is a huge problem for our Thursday games sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I very, very quickly went from playing the game to looking up what Pudding King was, and then I started looking at pictures of different versions of the Pudding King because somebody had mentioned it at the table, and I was like, oh, what? That sounds awesome / weird. Let me take a look at this. And then I spent like 25 minutes looking up silly pictures on my phone and showing them to everybody.
Yep, you did.
Yeah.
But it's not just you. A lot of people do it at the table, and I mean, I last week found a really cool DM table or D&D table that I wanted to make and started showing people. So we all do it. I think it's only problematic when it starts to disrupt the game.
Oh, for sure.
Having your phone out is one thing, and there have been times where I can multitask and I'm paying full attention to the game, and I'll be crocheting instead of using my phone, but I'm still paying attention and I'm still listening, I'm still interacting with the game. But some people can't do that. So if you can't do that, don't look at your phone. Just put it away.
Which, I mean, like you said, it is a little difficult now, especially with D&D Beyond being available on your phone. I mean, you can do it with, like, you know, phone, tablet, computer, what have you. And while it is much easier to just like, oh, what do I have to roll for my, what's my plus to my deception? Something like that. You can just swipe over and it's right there. Whereas with your actual paper character sheets, it gets a little more messy, especially when like leveling up and stuff like that. But personally, I mean, I'm fine either way as far as digital versus physical as far as character sheets are concerned.
Yeah.
But it does seem that the physical character sheets lead to less distraction as far as, you know, the like we just said, the D&D Beyond being on your phone type thing.
They lead to less distraction if you are a distractible person.
Right.
D&D Beyond is an amazing website and app, and it's great that you are able to have at your fingertips what all your spells do, what all your abilities do, especially for newer players. Because there's been so many times in our games that we're just like, oh, just click on it and you can tell exactly what it does. Instead of, oh, hey, I need the player's handbook. Let me go search for that page and where is it? And this is what it does. The problem comes when you start to look for other things and spend 45 minutes searching for something and going off on animal pictures that we didn't need to look at.
But they're so cute.
They are. That's why it's so distracting.
And to add on top of the whole like clicking on your spell and reading what it says and stuff like that, it will help drastically to read the whole spell, because there's been a bunch of situations where we read like the first half of the spell. We're like, okay, cool, it does this.
Click
And then,
on the spell.
yeah,
It gets bigger.
yeah, there's a lot more information in there than you'd think. I can't think of any specific situations where that came about, but I just know, like off the top of my head, that there's like quite a few spells in there that it'll just say like roll 2d6 fire damage for like firebolt, but then there's other spells that have their damage listed, but there are certain things that you can and then also cannot do with them that aren't just readily available on that screen. You have to click on the spell name, then it provides you with additional information.
You're confused, just click on it on D&D Beyond. It'll expand. It'll give you everything you need to know and read it all. Don't just skim, because you might miss what you're actually looking for.
For sure.
The next thing, I believe, is min-maxing and overpowered characters, which I may have had a podcast already about this.
I believe it.
So min-maxing, for those who don't know, is when you create a character that is specifically specialized to be perfect in every way that you can make them perfect. Most, in my personal opinion, D&D characters need to have flaws in some form of way, because that makes them more interesting and more realistic. If you just make a character that can destroy everything with a single blow, where's the fun in that? In my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, min-maxing as in of itself is almost, I wouldn't say game breaking exactly, but it's very close.
And I think it's fine if your entire party and DM are also like that.
Sure.
So if you're an overpowered player, find a group of people who also like to play overpowered, and find a DM who is able to manipulate the games to fit your story.
Absolutely. Just don't expect him or her not to throw, I don't know, 3 Krakens at you randomly throughout the game.
Super deadly encounters all the time. But the biggest thing that the reason why I think min-maxing is annoying is when other players are trying to tell me how to play my character to make them more effective.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That's why they fall on my annoying D&D player personally. It's like, nope, I did this on purpose. I promise.
I mean, most of us already don't like being told what to do to begin with. So taking a character that we created from something that either we came up with or maybe we drew an inspiration from something, and then have somebody else be like, oh yeah, but if you did this instead, all these other things will be much more powerful for your character, regardless of whether or not it makes sense for your character, like, period.
If you take a level in this next turn, you will become so much better. I'm like, but I don't wanna.
Yeah, and how do you work that into your actual character? Like, especially with dual classing, because sometimes that gets a little dicey.
I actually had a character that, like, I took a level in cleric because it fit the story. It made absolutely no sense for the character build, and it made her weaker technically, because, like, technically stronger because cleric, but weaker in the sense that I could have taken another level in ranger or rogue, which would have let me do more damage, which is what I was good at. But I took cleric because it fit the story for that time, and people are like, "Oh, well, you can just go change your character because we are allowed one free alteration of our character." I'm like, no, like, that fits the story. She took cleric for a reason. That was her trade-off, because they rescued her and resurrected her in exchange for her becoming a cleric for 6 months. So I did.
There you go. And you stayed true to the character, maybe not so much to the character, but to the story itself.
Exactly.
Which is way above. Like, I would 100% prefer dealing with something like that rather than basically going off of what you just said with you being resurrected by clerics and then just being like, screw it. I don't want to deal with being a cleric or learning anything about that whatsoever. Although they literally saved my life.
Right. I don't agree with it in character. I'm like, I have to worship things? Why? But she got really good at roguing as well while she was becoming a cleric, because she snuck out of the temple to go drink.
There you go. See, it works out in little interesting ways toward the end, I imagine.
Exactly. So the next one is running off ahead, aka Leroy Jenkins.
Indeed, yeah.
This happened in our games before, where somebody rushes off. I had this happen a lot in my Friday game specifically, where one character didn't like how long we were taking and would leave and go off on their own to do the thing that we were all supposed to do.
And then I'm sure they probably ran into a situation that they couldn't handle by themselves and then expected everybody just to kind of follow along.
I think the DM catered to them more, so it didn't really end up that way, but that's probably how it should have gone.
Gotcha.
That's what happened in was it Curse of Strahd? When somebody ran up and touched something and it should have started something, but we're like, and if it would have, they would have died probably.
For our games, you mean?
Yeah. It was Curse of Strahd, and they ran in and touched a statue that they weren't supposed to touch. And I think it was supposed to summon something that was supposed to kill us all, but they were by themselves.
I don't
remember
know
the specifics.
I don't remember that specifically because I know that the only person I think from what I can remember at the moment, the only person who's DM'd with our group, Curse of Strahd, was me. And I can guarantee you that if somebody had done that, I would have absolutely summoned the thing that would have probably wiped the party.
That's fair. I know that there was a game I DM'd. It was a play-by-post game, and I actually did end up killing the player because of it. They did
Nice.
something that caused them to die, but they ran off ahead because they got mad in character and stormed off from the party and just went through a random door that wasn't discovered yet and right into a group of bad guys that was meant for a party of 5 or 6 by themselves. And instead of going, oh shit, closing the door and going away, they're like, screw this, runs in and smashes one of their heads in. And I was like, I gotta attack you back now, right? And then he gets attacked.
Just because you're the only one there doesn't mean that they're not going to jump on you now. Come on.
Pretty much. And so he gets attacked, and then he tries to run, and I'm like, they get an attack of opportunity because you're trying to run because you attacked and then left instead of disengaging. And I gave him the option of just changing that and disengaging instead. And he said, no, I hit them. I said, okay, attack of opportunity, that's a crit 20.
Ouch. Jeez.
And it was negative. He didn't die outright, but nobody knew where he went.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave them 18 seconds to figure it out in game, and nobody went to go find him yet. And I said, okay, roll me some death saves, and he rolled a 1.
Oh, God, of course.
Yeah, so his character died. I did let him stay as a ghost for a little bit, just so he could stay in the game. But he wasn't actually able to do anything. He just did weird ghost things occasionally. And ultimately they went and resurrected him. But I gave him PTSD, I think.
As a flaw.
Yeah, he had to, if he was alone, he had to roll a wisdom save or he would start to have a panic attack.
There you go.
Because the way that the system works in that server is if you are resurrected, you have a negative thing happen. So for my character, my negative is that she is cold vulnerability because she died from a cone of cold.
Oh, okay.
So I gave him the option. We talked it out, and it's always an equal understanding and mutual agreement. But I said I was thinking because you ran off alone and you fought these guys by yourself, that maybe we go with more of a mental thing where you start to panic if you are by yourself. Or if things start to get stressful, you start to panic. And I'm not saying you outright can't do anything, but if you fail, it can get worse unless somebody calms you down. If you roll a 1, you have a full-blown panic attack and you can't do anything. And he agreed to those terms, so we went on with it.
Very nice. Very nice. I'm into that. And you said that was a play-by-post game?
Play-by-post we do it on Discord, but you have a character and you just comment as all through text and you play slowly over time. It's a lot slower than our games normally are, but you can play with people who are all over the world without having to sit in have a certain time frame, like 7 p.m. You just comment once per day if you can.
Oh, okay. I will say that I don't think it probably takes longer than the games that we usually play, but that's fine.
Uh,
At least based on, I mean, we've had like a couple breaks here and there with the current one that we run on Thursdays, but it's been a bit.
well, I guess it can take like a month or two to do a quest in play by post, and it feels like forever because if you're in a fight, then you have to wait for each person, and sometimes if you have somebody who's very slow, it can take forever. But if you have people who are like on their game and actually respond properly, then it can go by pretty quickly.
Nice. Okay. That sounds interesting. I don't know honestly if me personally I would be able to do something like that. I think I'd get bored very quickly and then just kind of leave the group.
I mean, I could always
But
invite
that's
you
just
to the server and you could try it out if you wanted.
we'll see. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. So the next one was cohesive parties. Now this
Yes.
one's kind of like a pregame rule. You when you make a party, and I discussed this with my session 0 episode, I believe. It's really good to make sure you have a party that's going to work together most of the time. I say most of the time because sometimes inter-party conflicts can be interesting,
Mm-hmm.
but it can also be distracting if it goes too far.
Yeah, very, very true. Prime example of inter-party conflict that worked relatively well was in our Thursday game. My older character, who sadly perished, had a huge issue with one of our other characters. Mine was Lathless, the wizard, and the other one was Crom, the warlock. I don't exactly remember how our quote-unquote rivalry started. I think it was just
Lathis was being a
because,
jackass.
I mean, that's probably how it happened. But I mean, aside from that, like, even if your characters in game don't get along, because the guy who's playing Crom is my roommate, so we give each other shit all the time, regardless. So being able to take that and then basically convert it into characters on D&D made that a lot of fun. Where even though our characters didn't really know each other very well, we would just give each other shit back and forth all the time.
Yep. And it can work if you make it work, as long as you still work together as a team when it matters. However, there are instances where if you have good characters and evil characters, it doesn't always work.
Yeah, I mean, on a more fundamental level, that makes it a little more difficult to kind of wrap together.
Well, a perfect example is if like you have one lawful good character and then a bunch of chaotic and evil, but not necessarily just evil, just like chaotic characters. And the lawful good character, actually Vash, look at Vash when he first was in our group.
That would say old Vash, got it.
Old Vash, yes. Not new Vash, who's a jackass too. But old Vash was a lawful good character. He followed the law, and if you broke the law, he would make sure to tell you that you broke the law. And he's like, well, we got to report this. What are you going to do? Like, how dare you break into the house of the person that you're trying to save, like, or whatever the situation may be. Where we had a bunch of chaotic characters who weren't evil necessarily, but they just didn't give a crap. And that didn't really click very well at first.
For sure. Yeah, especially your character was a drug addict, or like you basically grew weed and then you had to try to like hide that around him all the time.
An aficionado.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm sorry. That was my mistake.
Yes.
I used the incorrect terms.
You did. We had a drunk, we had an angry person, we had a druggie, and then we had a guard who just wanted to arrest us all the time.
Basically.
Vash ended up leaving. We got a new character to replace him. That character died. Then Vash came back and was a little different. And now he's just a jerk.
Now he's closer to Lathless.
Now he's just evil and a jerk.
Yeah. But it makes it more fun because now we're not tiptoeing around or stepping on eggshells around him all the time.
Exactly.
Worrying about what we're doing and how it could be misconstrued as incorrect or wrong.
And the biggest thing with cohesiveness in a party is if your character wouldn't fit into the scenario anymore, don't force it. Like, I have had characters leave a party in game, not necessarily for our games, but in the past I've had characters leave and they just didn't fit anymore. They didn't feel comfortable in that group anymore. And they're like, this is going down a place I don't want to go to. So I was sad, but I had them retire temporarily so that I could bring in a character that would fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Like your what was it? Didn't you have like a deaf character?
Yes, I did have a character that I attempted to play. I thought my husband played a mute character, and I thought it would be interesting to play a deaf character because I do have a respect for the deaf community, and I wanted to see if that would work. And it didn't. We almost died in the first fight, partially because there was a fog cloud covering up everything, so what I could see, I couldn't tell anything, but also because our cleric didn't have healing spells.
Oh, that's right. That was during that campaign.
Yep.
I forgot about that.
So she ended up retiring.
And my wife's character was your interpreter.
Yes.
Wasn't that what it
Yeah,
was?
we had we had a fun, I really liked that dynamic. My best friend's character, Greg's wife, Ashley made a character that in her head was perfectly sane and normal sounding, but out loud sounded absurd. And she was based off of a Borderlands character that I don't play Borderlands, so I don't remember the name of the character.
It was just a psycho.
Yeah, okay, after a psycho from Borderlands. And basically, she would scream out random things that didn't make any sense to anybody else. But in her head, she was saying something perfectly sound. And my character, being deaf, only could hear her thoughts in her head because I purposely made my character telepathic so I could talk to her. And I'm like, no, that made complete sense. Why are they freaking out right now? And out loud, she was screaming like something about destroying babies or something. I don't remember.
Yeah, it was something random. She actually went online and like printed out a list of all the different things that psychos from Borderlands said, and she would just roll a die and pick one, just yell it out in the middle of everything. It was amazing.
My favorite was like meat puppets.
Something I have I don't remember any of the crap that was said because it was just so out there.
But unfortunately, like I had to decide like this isn't going to work in this game. So I retired my character and made a new character who also was not cohesive with the party.
And if I remember correctly, that was the same campaign that we was that the one where I was playing the Asimar Paladin? Is that campaign?
Yes, the one where we all became really evil or nonchalant and didn't care. And my husband, who was DMing, basically said, y'all need to make better characters because this isn't going to work.
Because we're literally going into hell and have to like work with all of these different scenarios that most like good characters would be like, oh no, but we were just like, yeah, whatever, you know. Oh, this woman and her daughter were being murdered in front of us by a bunch of demons. We're just like, we'll leave them to be. They'll be fine.
It was Descend into Avernus, and while you can play it as an evil campaign, I believe the campaign is built to be played by good characters, and we were not. So we're just like, do we have to save them? It's like, why are we even doing this? Like, we literally was like, they're like, you need to go rescue the world. Why? Are we going to lose money if are we getting paid? No. Well, then why would we do that?
Yeah, I'm just gonna go about my business. Let the world in. What do I care?
Somebody else can take care of it.
Yeah.
So we had to make new characters. We haven't started that campaign back up yet, but we made new characters so we wouldn't just not have a reason to go save the world.
Yeah. Should be interesting when we get that started back up, whenever that'll happen.
Yes. So now, something that Greg is great at, rules lawyering. And now I do it too, I will say, but rules lawyering. This can be annoying
Can be.
if it disrupts your game.
Yeah, like you just said, I am a rules lawyer. Like I constantly have my phone open and ready to look up something. Like I believe Thursday in our game, I kind of said something to you. I don't remember if it was over text or verbally, but it was like our barbarian should didn't attack for something for a turn or something like that, and her
Oh,
rage
yeah.
should have went away.
Yeah.
But then I was like, I don't think that's right. And I didn't say anything. Like I didn't like stop the game and be like, hey, no, she shouldn't have her rage up anymore because last turn she didn't attack or didn't take damage. Blah 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 blah. I didn't do any of that. I usually would, but I mean, we're right at the end of that campaign, so I don't really want to do anything that'll halt progress at this point. But that's only in that particular instance. There's been many a time, especially when I'm DMing. I have stopped games a few different times to double check a ruling for some kind of spell cast or anything like that. Really, it makes me feel bad sometimes when like I mentioned earlier, where you're stopping the game to look up something and then your players are just kind of sitting there waiting for you to figure something out for 5, maybe
Twiddling
10
their
minutes,
thumbs.
depending on what it is. Yeah, twiddling their thumbs or being on their phones, which is what we talked about earlier. But the rules are made for a reason, and I understand that there are different things that can be said as far as adjustments to the rules or the ability to bend them to a certain degree. Because it is Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, the rules aren't set in stone. The rules are more like guidelines than anything else. But I mean that's more, at least in the way I'm envisioning it currently, that's more for storytelling as well as just general silliness rather than actual combat, because combat in my eyes or in my brain is way different than like role playing, at least as far as the rules and their ability to bend are concerned.
Yeah, I think combat, like, they have rules for a reason, and it was balanced to a extent. And yes, there are flaws in the system. And currently we play 5th edition, but all the systems have a flaw and have their own rules. And there's been plenty of times where all of us have done something or cast something or tried to do something that the DM would allow. And then we looked it up after. We're like, oh crap, sorry, that wasn't how it was supposed to work. Here's how it actually is supposed to work. So going forward, we know how to do it right. A perfect example was I think I mentioned this before, but there was a time where I cast Moonbeam or Fire Spear or something like that, and it said you can move it as an action for up to 60 feet. So in my head, I thought I could move the Moonbeam straight through a bunch of enemies and thus hit all of them. And that's what the DM allowed because that's made sense to us. And then we looked it up and we verified, no, that's not how it works. Once it hits somebody, it stops. And we're like, oh, okay. Well, then now we know, because we thought that was a little broken, but we're like, okay, now we know in the future we won't let it happen.
Yeah, especially with Moonbeam specifically, because it's literally a pillar of light. It's not a physical object that actually can like bump into things like a fire sphere can.
Right.
So based on the way you read Moonbeam, it literally says as an action on your turn you can move it. I believe it's 30 or maybe 60 feet. I don't remember offhand. So in my head, it's like, oh, I could literally just like spin this thing in a circle and hit a bunch of enemies multiple times with it.
And the same thing happens with Healing Spirit. Technically, Healing Spirit in the book that it was released in originally doesn't have a specification on how many times you can use it. I think it was originally created to be used in a way that isn't overpowered, but right now it's technically kind of broken. But from what I've read, I think they nerfed it, and now you can only use it 1 plus your spellcasting ability modifier, minimum of twice, technically. But the original ruling was it didn't have that. It just said you have it, and then as an action, you can move it if you want. So we used it in game where we were not in battle, and we just ran in a circle until we were all healed.
The carousel of healing.
Pretty much. But I think they nerfed it. I have to find the actual proof, but I'm looking on dnd5ed.wiki.com, which is a mouthful. And it says the spirit can heal a number of times equal to 1 plus your spellcasting ability modifier, for which for me would be 4 times instead of, I think we did like 10 or 12.
Yeah, it was a little intense.
Which makes sense. So those types of things aren't necessarily set in stone in the book too, and you have to find the adaptions and the updates that are made online. I forget the name of the I think it's Savage something. I don't know. It's something that used to be done by Jeremy Crawford on his actual Twitter, and then it became that this is not the official rule set, and they have an actual thing that comes out where it's the official rules. Like these are the updated rules, and they update a lot of things that had questions or concerns or were broken.
Yeah, because it's difficult to like write a new spell and then just automatically know the way that everybody's going to interpret it. So there's always going to be updates.
Sage advice is what it is.
Oh, there you go.
So if you ever have questions, look up the Sage Advice Compendium. There might be an answer in there. And that actually, when we did our spells episode, that was where I found a lot of the information was on that compendium, and it explained things that didn't necessarily get explained in the original book.
That was a good website. I learned a lot.
Yep.
Did I retain any of it? Probably not, but I learned.
Learning is the first step.
Sure.
So the next one I think is more for you. Rolling dice without being asked.
Yeah. There's been many times, whether I'm a player or a DM, where I've had to look at another player or a player and ask them. Usually it's nice, unless it gets really out of hand. Hey, there's no... okay. There's a point. Like I'm perfectly fine with people like before we start playing, like, oh, which D20 am I going to use? And they roll it a couple times to make sure. I mean, realistically, it has nothing to do with anything, but to see like how it rolls.
Yeah, like Laura Bailey.
Oh, I got a 20 on this one. Oh, I got a 5 on this one. Yeah, like Laura Bailey. Exactly. Yeah. So figure. Well, I mean, she has insane amounts of dice. Not to say that I don't, but So I understand that point. Like you can do it at the beginning, but like as the game's playing out, don't just pick up a D20 or a bunch of D6s or something and just start rolling randomly. Specifically, I think when we had our session 0 for the next Curse of Strahd campaign I'm going to be running, I believe that was one of the rules that I set out, was that I don't want anybody rolling dice when they're not supposed to, mostly because it's like, or not even mostly when they're not supposed to, but they can't say, oh, I'm going to, like they're in the process of saying something, and then they roll the die, and then that gives them the door opens for you to say, oh, I was going to do something, but this die says I can't do that, so I'm going to adjust my thinking based on the die roll.
I don't like it when people roll and then tell you they rolled. Like, oh, I just rolled a perception check. It's like, did I ask you to roll a perception check?
Yeah, you always want to make sure that the DM is aware of what you're doing, and gives you the okay to make a die roll. Because otherwise you can literally just roll the die and then, like you could roll a D20 6 or 7 different times and then have it land on a 20 and be like, that's my next roll. Got it.
I already rolled. I got a 20. Guys, I'm amazing. I see everything.
Yeah, I'm not into that at all. That is one of my bigger pet peeves when it comes to player etiquette and DM etiquette.
I am a firm I do roll my dice at the beginning and sometimes in the middle. Like if my dice are rolling really bad, I'll pick up some other D20s and I'll roll like 2 or 3 of them and be like, okay, this one is my next dice that I'm going to roll. But I never keep the roll that they get. I'm just like,
right,
that's the dice that rolled better. That's the dice I'm going to roll with next time. Some false hope that it'll do better the next time I roll.
Right. Even if you do have a player that's doing that, what a rule that I've kind of just randomly popped into my head that I think I would start doing is if a player does that, even if it's a good roll, they have to re-roll it. If it's a bad roll, they keep that roll, regardless of whether or not they said they were going to do something or not. If they're sitting there just constantly rolling the dice over and over again, give them an incentive to stop doing that.
Yeah, I mean,
so the next time it rolls on a 1, when they're rolling randomly, that's their roll. Whatever next thing they're going to do, that's the total for the roll.
That is a very extreme way to end it from happening. It could work.
Just something that popped into my head.
Could work. The next one is one that I think I've also done a podcast on, metagaming. There are so many different types of metagaming. Now, there are times where it is accidental. I have accidentally metagamed in some of my games with people with a DM who is very, very, very against metagaming. And I didn't do it intentionally. We were all at the table. Information was shared. I didn't realize in my head, because it was like 3 weeks prior, that my character wasn't there. So my character didn't know that information. So I had said something along the lines of, but didn't we do blah, 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 or didn't we hear blah, blah, blah? And they were like, no metagaming. And like, it didn't even click to me that it was metagaming at the time, because I'm like, no, I think I remember hearing that. But my character didn't hear it. And that's because I have a shitty memory. It wasn't because I was like actually trying to cheat the system.
Uh-huh.
I know, I'm really, really do have a shitty memory. Why do you think I take notes on Thursday?
Very fair.
But there are certain types of metagaming. Like there's the obvious ones where the stereotypical one that people mention a lot is, if you in game don't know what a werewolf is, you wouldn't know that they're allergic to silver and they take vulnerability to silver weapons, unless you did research in game to find out that information. That's the basic one. Don't use outside game knowledge to help your character do in-game things.
And we're all guilty of that, especially those of us who have been playing Dungeons and Dragons for an extended period of time, because we're so used to running into these types of enemies that maybe not immediately, but over time you can kind of just memorize or just remember, oh, this thing is weak against fire, or this thing is immune to fire, something like that, and then you maybe not intentionally, but you could potentially not cast a fire spell on that creature because you remembered that it has a immunity.
Right. And that's technically metagaming. Now, the other version of metagaming is when things happen in the game and your character isn't there to see it, or they didn't roll high enough to see it or tell, and then using that information to still treat the situation differently. And that's happened to me before, where I successfully stealthed or successfully did a sleight of hand check, and then successfully did a persuasion check to convince this person that I didn't do anything, yet they were still suspicious, even though they had no reason to be in character. Out of character, they knew that I stole something. In character, they didn't see it, and they believed my persuasion that I didn't do it, yet they were still suspicious, and that's still a type of metagaming.
Absolutely. I've like I said, I'm very much guilty of doing it as well. Perhaps not intentionally, but everybody does it. Everybody. There are certain things that personally, like I thought a version of metagaming would be to. I mentioned this to one of our players a while back, and turns out I was mistaken. But saying that you're gonna hit something like based on your attack versus their armor class, if you notice a pattern, whereas like, oh, a 16 misses but in a 17 hits, you yourself know that their AC is 17. And I spoke out against a player and I was like, hey, that's metagaming. It's not. It's just recognizing patterns, but I thought that was. So there are certain things that can be misconstrued as metagaming when that actually aren't.
But there's some DMs that is metagaming. Like I have a DM that actually will say something if you start saying, "Oh, guys, their AC is 17." Like it's fine if you use that knowledge to yourself, but if other people aren't picking up those patterns, then it's kind of like it's a very minor version of it. But just don't like yell at people's AC all of a sudden, even if you're figuring it out by patterns. Like I think it's fine because if like sometimes the DM will say, "Oh, that just hit." So you're like, ha, I know what their AC is. I know what my goal is. But that doesn't stop you from, in my opinion, with that one, that doesn't stop you or change anything that you're going to do, because you can't make the dice roll better.
Right. No, you're absolutely right about that. It doesn't really adjust your play style in any way, shape, or form. It was just something that I happened to be like, hey, don't do that, and then realizing that it's kind of a silly thing to tell them not to do it.
Now, another one type of metagaming that irritated the fuck out of me was when I was DMing. This was a real life game a couple of years ago, and this player was in a room really far away from other people. Like they went in a different direction, and that was fine, whatever. But they found something, and another player who was nowhere near them was like, "What you find?" And he's like, "Nothing," and he put in his bag in character. So that the character who was metagaming, he's like, I go to find him, and I walk in the room and go, "What'd you find?" And it's like, you don't know he found anything. He told you nothing. And then he persuaded you and you believed him, or deceived you and believed him. And he still pestered him for like 20 minutes about what he found because he wanted the thing that he found.
Yeah, that's
And
not
I'm like,
okay. There's been a ton of situations where I've literally had to stop a game and be like, "Look, you're not there. You're not privy to this information. Just stop."
yeah, this guy was not understanding that logic. He just kept going. And another thing with metagaming, kind of, well, I guess this could kind of go into the strategizing out of character type thing that we discussed.
Yes.
If you are in character and you're about to go up against a fight, I think it's personally okay for out of character discussions. Be like, how are we going to handle this? What do we know in character to help us with this battle? Who's going in first? What are our game plans? And a perfect example is we fought something and Lathlus was like, I'm going to fireball first, so nobody rushed in. And we knew that before we even went into battle. And he reached in, did the fireball, and then we could go in and we started attacking. That to me isn't metagaming. What it is
No, absolutely not.
metagaming is if you didn't have that discussion ahead of time, you're in the middle of battle and the barbarian goes first and rushes in to attack, and then somebody else goes, oh, no, 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 I was about to fireball. Like, nope, that's not how this works.
Yeah, that's another thing that another rule that I kind of instated when we start the new Curse of Strahd campaign is in combat, whoever's turn it is, they can talk. Everybody else needs to they can talk amongst themselves, specifically if their characters are next to each other in actual, like, on the map. They can speak to each other briefly here and there, but aside from that, whoever's turn it is, they do what they want to do. They talk, they do their thing. Everybody else keeps quiet, because we don't want situations exactly like that. We were like, oh, no, 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 no. I was going to do something on my next turn, so I need you to adjust what you're going to do so that way it doesn't affect what I was going to do. That's not okay.
Yeah, and that also falls into the telling other people how to play their character.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between being helpful and being controlling, like
An asshole.
or an asshole. Yes. You are playing your character. They are playing their character. It's one thing to say, "Hey, don't forget to hunter's mark," if you're a ranger. Because like on my Friday game, our ranger always forgets to hunter's mark, and she's like, "Crap, I always forget that." So out of courtesy,
Sure.
we say, "Hey, don't forget to hunter's mark before you attack," because if you do it after, it doesn't count. So that isn't telling people how to play their characters. That's a friendly reminder. What's telling someone how to play their character? I'm going to rush in and do this. Oh, well, actually, if you just shot them with a longbow, you would get this instead. No, 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 don't run in. Just shoot them with the longbow. Like, no, if they said they're going to run in, they're going to run in. They want to run in, let them run in. They'll learn from
Right.
their mistakes.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, but maybe that's what the character does. They run in and they punch things. Like, let them do it. And then after the fact, in character, go, what have you learned?
Which I believe is something that happened on Thursday about the pudding.
Yeah, somebody stuck their nose into a place it shouldn't have belonged and got attacked by a pudding, a black pudding or gray ooze.
Black pudding, yeah.
And got real hurt. And
then I believe it was my character who actually literally went at the end of the fight. So what did we learn here?
absolutely nothing.
Yeah, chances are.
The other thing is, like, honestly, kind of going with that theme, like, don't yell at people for doing something in character. Don't give them a hard time for doing something incorrect. I've had that happen to me where in Pathfinder, if you shoot a piercing weapon, like I was using an arrow, we were fighting a swarm of bats. And in 5th edition, a swarm of bats, you can just shoot whatever and it'll hit. In Pathfinder, they're immune to piercing damage because it's a swarm, I guess. And I was like, but it should hit something. Like there's dozens of them. So my character did not know that. She shot an arrow at them, and a player was like, "Why would you do that?" I was like, "Because my character didn't know any better." Yeah, but you should know better. And like,
that's not how this works.
Yeah, they gave me like a really difficult time about it. And I'm like, well, my character doesn't. And actually, I didn't either because in 5th edition, that's not how that works. You can just attack it unless they're immune to piercing, which they're not. They take half damage. They're resistant to it, but they're not immune. Like,
And while we're on the subject, I would like to give your husband Keith kudos for purposely avoiding metagaming on Thursday with the pudding, because he did slice it in half and it split, and he was like, I can't remember the exact scenario, but he cut it in half with a sword. It split into two, and then I think my wife, who was the DM, Ashley, she had a question about it, and then he looked up the black pudding to read to try to help her out with what it said. But he literally read the whole thing for the monster, so he knew everything about it. But he specifically on his next turn hit it again with the sword. Although he himself knew that it would split again, his character, I guess, didn't pick up on that.
yeah, it's like, oh, that's weird. It split. But then he did it again. It's like, oh, that's why.
I get it now.
Weird. Every time I hit him with my sword, it splits. That's such a coincidence. I keep doing it.
So yeah, I just had to give him a little kudos for that, because that was cool of him.
Yeah, and that kind of plays into like that happened the other day, and I kind of got annoyed about it, but it made sense also when we fought against the gas spores. Like I looked up or Ashley was having a difficult time like seeing what the disease did, so I looked it up to help, and I was trying to like show her without like saying it out loud so people would know, hey, this disease is going to freaking kill you. And that didn't quite happen. So I did get a little annoyed at the fact that suddenly, like, oh, I'm going to heal myself because I know I'm diseased, but I kind of got it at the same time. And those kind of things, like you want to, I was like, I'm trying not to say it out loud because I don't want it to, I don't want them to know they're gonna die in like 1d12 plus whatever hours.
Right.
Well, they're gonna die. Like,
it's something bad's gonna happen.
Like, that's the biggest thing. Like, if you don't know it in character, then just do it. And the same person did accurately like try something in character that he thought out of character wouldn't work, and it didn't work. So that's the type of things that you live and learn. Like you're improving, you show that you're doing something, and that's great. And I think everybody does it, like I said, every once in a while unintentionally. But if you do look, I feel like I can look up a character, a NPC's stats or a monster's stats without metagaming because I can differentiate between the two. Like I look it up because I'm curious less than anything. But to some DMs, that's like a big no-no, like do not look it up. And I try to wait until after the game unless it's like, hey, I'm trying to help.
Right. Yeah, specifically don't like in the middle of combat be like, what are we fighting? How do you spell that? Or let me type that into my phone here. Like don't do that.
I've done it just to like look what they look like, but I was like, what are we even fighting? Like what do they look like? Oh, those are cool looking. And then like I go back to the game. But I don't like look up their stats.
I mean, I would say, as far as that's concerned, like that would be a more for the DM to describe to you what you're actually looking at and fighting. I mean, even if we don't have a mini for the creature, it's it's up to it's in my eyes, it's for the DM to explain to you what you're looking at.
Yeah, it's just like more when we're in the middle of the fight already, and I think it was explained, and then I'm just like not picturing it still, and I'm like,
Okay, sure, that's fair.
What are we fighting? Like I'm confused.
Yeah, fair, very fair. And don't get us wrong, guys. Like it's like we've said a couple times now, everybody does it. And I completely understand that it's very difficult to, at least for me, like I have a big problem with completely separating my knowledge from my character's knowledge. So even though you're in the same room with other people, like and you're not in that room in character, like the example that Nikki gave earlier, it is difficult sometimes to separate your knowledge to your character's knowledge. So it happens. Just don't let it get out of hand. Don't do it intentionally, because then it ruins I wouldn't say it ruins the sanctity of the game, but it hurts.
It can make the game less fun for others.
For sure.
And just be open to people saying, hey, can you not for a little bit? This is bugging me, or like as long as it's within reason. If they're like, your breathing is bugging me, can you stop? Then Like, obviously don't do that.
I don't know what you're talking about. This is, I mean, I'm on this side of the microphone. I'm perfectly fine with it.
I'm so deleting all of that. But yeah, just like have fun with it, but also like make sure you're in the group that is okay with it, with most of it. And make sure the DM is okay with some things, like the rules lawyering or co-DMing, which some people call it. Like, make sure the DM is wanting you to do that. Greg and I know specifically that Ashley is okay with it. Or when somebody else is DMing, like all four of us are pretty close friends, so we are aware that we're not doing it from a negative standpoint. We're doing it to help. So I personally don't think anybody hates on each other for helping.
Yeah, probably not.
Probably.
I would hope
This
not.
is how Greg tells me that he hates it when I tell him how to play the game.
I mean, I just hate you as a person, but that's, you know, that's another podcast.
Anyway,
Just kidding. I wouldn't be doing this podcast with you if I hate you.
that's fair. You're stuck with me anyway.
Hooray! Well, I was to begin with because Ashley is your best friend, so
Yep.
kind of got dragged into that.
So on that note, I would like to say that yes, this podcast has been on hiatus for 2 months. That was mostly because of computer issues, but we are back and we are going to be doing this weekly again. Release dates, I believe, will stay on Monday. The subject change, maybe. We do still have the Facebook on Beholder to No One and the Twitter on Beholder to No One. Both will become more active soon. And there are discussions for potential new things to come. We will leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know about you. I don't think we've spoken about this specifically, but I wouldn't be completely adverse to maybe having a guest on every so often, just to have another perspective on certain things.
Yeah, guests are more than welcome. Usually it was me with a guest, but now there are two of us, so it'll be two of us with a guest. Alex is no longer going to be part of this. I have no ill will towards Alex. I wish him the best. LNS Leather Crafting Arts, still can find them on Facebook, so go check them out. But Greg and I will be your host for now on.
Huzzah! And I will say that I do apologize the last time I was on with all of the random noise in the background. I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a nerd. So I was sorting Magic the Gathering cards while I was doing the episode, which explains, you know, the random noises and also maybe why I wasn't fully present for these episodes. But I guarantee from here on, I'm going to be completely present while doing this.
Live and learn.
Indeed.
We will also be getting equipment that will make this sound even better, so that's exciting.
Yeah. You get to hear the dulcet tones of my voice in stereoscopy.
With noise canceling around and all that jazz.
Yeah.
But yeah, so check us out on Facebook and Twitter, and also you can listen to this podcast wherever podcasts really are. Podbean, specifically Spotify, iTunes, all that jazz. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on one of those areas. Honestly, Facebook and Twitter are probably the best bet.
Yep, for sure.
And we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.